Okay, hey, hi everybody. We're gonna get started. So welcome everybody to this panel. There's a lot going on in struggles of higher education. There's a very recent occupation of the New School University Center. So it's a very important moment, I think. So this is why we wanted to set up this discussion. And my name is Luis. I'm a member of the Tempest Collective and also a graduate student at the New School and a student worker. And I'm going to be introducing the panelists. So we're going to have Sam, who is going to be online. He is a PhD candidate in sociology at UC Santa Barbara and the Tempest Collective member. Gerry Martini, him, is a member of the Professional Staff Congress, PSC, the Union of the City University of New York, CUNY, faculty and staff. He is a delegate in the PSC Delegate Assembly, as well as the editor of the crowdsourced PSC glossary. He is an organizer and activist with Rank and File Action CUNY, RAPA, an organization that fights for more democratic and militant PSC, as well as for free and fully funded and liberatory CUNY. Gerry works in the Office of Admissions at CUNY, at the CUNY Grad Center, and spends his free time watching soccer, playing Dungeons and Dragons or darts, and gazing lovely at his cat. So we have Monica Panzarino, her, is a video artist and adjunct professor in the Integrated Design and Media program at the Tandem School of Engineering at the New York University. She is a member of the NYU Adjunct Union Organizing Committee at ACT UAW Local 7902. And we have Eun Jeong, is a member of the Student Workers of Columbia, Local 2710 of UAW, and a member of the Tempest Collective. And we also have Dianca London Potts. She, hers, is earned her MFA in creative writing from the New School and her MA in English and her MA in humanities from Arcadia University. She is a part-time faculty at Eugene Lang and a member of the New School Part-Time Faculty Union's Bargaining Committee at ACT UAW Local 7902. In addition to her work at the New School, Dianca is also a part-time faculty at Pratt Institute, John Jay College of Criminal Justice, and you can follow her musings on Twitter via at Dianca London. So, no further ado. Sam is starting. Is he ready?
Should I start?
Yep, Sam, go ahead.
Okay, awesome. So this is kind of interesting. I was in New School 2016 to 18 when the grad workers there went on strike to get a contract. And now in California. I think the story in California is similar to what's happening at the New School, to what happened in Columbia, and basically everywhere else that UAW is involved. And it's just been very interesting to see sort of live how UAW essentially undermines worker power and sabotages a contract. So I'm going to give a story of what's happened here over the past few years and how we've gotten here. So in our local, which is 2865 of us TAs, and we're now striking with 58110, which is the postdocs and the researchers. And also there is a new unit for student researchers who are hoping to have their first contract. So all three of us started our strike November 14. And now we are in the fourth week. The postdocs already have a settlement. They haven't voted on it yet. And I think our bargaining teams for SRs and the ASCs are hoping to have a tentative agreement by the end of this week. These agreements for all three units are absolutely terrible. And our bargaining teams, since we started this strike, the only thing they've done is to concede without the university really making any steps towards us. So how have we got here? In 2014, So we had our previous contract negotiations were 2018 and 14. And of course, there's a story before that, but I want to start in 2014 because for the contract negotiations in that year, we had a rank and file caucus taking power in our union called ADU, Academic Workers for a Democratic Union, that then spread to NYU and some other places in the States. They got a majority vote over 80%. The contract was passed and it was a huge advance. But by 2018, ADU lost power to an attack from UAW's administrative caucus. From 2018, from 2016, they sent more staff. They tried to recruit sort of more conservative students to the union. And as a lot of people who were involved in ADU sort of graduated and left, the rank and file caucus was weakened. And by 2018, right before the contract negotiations, the administrative caucus won over. And this is for all the 10 UC campuses, right? They won over. They actively prevented a strike. And they had a really bad contract that hardly addressed cost of living adjustments. They used union funds to advocate for that contract. They barely got a majority vote of 54%. And there were campuses such as Santa Cruz where more than 80% rejected the 2018 contract. The contract went through, but the resentments from those negotiations over the next couple of years resulted in extensive rank and file organizing, particularly in Santa Cruz, but to some extent at Santa Barbara as well. And in 2019, Santa Cruz went on a wildcat strike to demand a COLA, cost of living adjustment. The strike spread to other campuses. The first campus to follow them was us here at Santa Barbara. And then it spread to smaller extent to Davis, San Diego. And then Berkeley was joining the strike department by department. And I think they were getting close to 10 departments when COVID happened and essentially killed the wildcat strike. Two main things happened throughout the wildcat strike. On the one side, of course, the administrative caucus and many of the representatives were absolutely livid. They did all they could to kill the strike and sabotage the strikers. While at the same time, formally, the strikers managed to force their hand in charging a ULP strike against the university and actually take some legal steps. On the other hand, the positive aspect of the strike was that many rank and file members on campuses such as Santa Cruz, Santa Barbara, Davis, and other places were elected as part of our local leadership. And it is now those representatives in our bargaining team that are voting against the administrative caucus, though they don't have majority. So every vote in our bargaining team is now 10 against 9, with 10 being the administrative caucus and 9 being the representatives that came out of the COLA wildcat strikes. And of course, the 9 are losing with that narrow majority. So basically, it was that wildcat that got us here. It created networks of rank and file organizing, and it definitely pushed UAW leadership. But since this strike began, it began with like this huge rhetoric, at least in the media of UAW, that this is the biggest strike in the history of higher education, which is true, but also false. It's so big because it's 10 campuses, as opposed to most other universities who are just one campus, such as Columbia or New School. And of course, it's 3 different units. But they presented it as this immensely strong strike. And just 1 week into the strike, our bargaining team conceded one of our major demands, which was COLA. They just They organized a caucus meeting 1 hour before bargaining with the university. 500 people joined the Zoom meeting. 400 people were in the overflow, and there were some who just didn't want to be in the overflow. So basically roughly 1,000 people. And almost everyone asked them not to drop COLA. The only people who talked in favor of dropping COLA had clearly like written scripts that they were reading from, which was given to them by the bargaining team members. As soon as the caucus meeting ended, they convened bargaining with the university and they dropped COLA. So clearly, inputs from rank and file was irrelevant. And this is 1 week into this strike, right? And that's the pattern that they've taken over the basically past 3 weeks, conceding demands. Since then, they've conceded access needs, they've conceded dependent healthcare. Just last week, they conceded $12,000 from our base wage demand. And now, just 2 days ago, they've conceded even more. All of this is without UC making any step. And more importantly, it's without us having our strongest bargaining chip, which is withholding grades, right? We haven't got to withholding grades yet. We're just entering the exam period, or like some exams have already done. So we're just getting to the point where we can withhold grades. It's so the other side of this, and how much time do I have? Am I out of time? Any ideas? No? Okay. So I don't know how much time I have, but I'll try to wrap up in a couple minutes. So the way in which they have been sort of conceding and sabotaging a strike is by create certain rhetoric, and of course by gaining control.
7K for a 3-course class for adjuncts was supposed to be the top demand in the last contract for PSC. Because there are so many adjuncts in the CUNY system who teach a full course load and are still living in poverty because of how low the wages are, we really felt like this was a non-negotiable contract demand, and that if we did not get it, we should not accept any contract. So as soon as the PSC released a proposal that did not have 7K in it, we immediately switched to vote no mode, which was actually relatively successful. We had a 14% no vote, which is the highest in the history of any contract for the PSC. We had committees on most campuses around the system. We had a propaganda committee that was putting out literature, making memes, etc. And even though we didn't win, and 14% doesn't sound that good, I think it's about double what the next highest no vote in the history of the PSC has been. And the momentum from that allowed us to continue as the organization that we are now today, which is rank and file action. And I could say talk about a lot of things today, but I want to focus on 2 really important things that I think of in terms of fighting for the university that we really want as workers. And the first is militancy. We have taken that 7K or strike part incredibly to heart. And I want to first mention something called the Taylor Law. If those of you who are not familiar with it, the Taylor Law is a law that prevents, well, doesn't prevent, it makes striking illegal in New York State. We have always had the position that this is something that should be ignored. It should be broken. Withholding your labor is our strongest weapon that we have as workers. And by giving it up because we're afraid of these penalties, we are giving up a lot of our potential power. Especially when at this time we had just seen all of these educators in red states where they should have had a lot less support for striking than we will have here in New York State, striking and winning and not facing legal penalties for doing so it just seems so shocking that we are so terrified of this law, and we feel very strongly that this is something we have to actively fight and ignore. Because frankly, if you are in higher ed today and you don't think that we need to strike to win the sort of university that we need, that our students need, you are working in a wildly optimistic world that I am not a part of, frankly. I don't really understand it. We don't seem to be fighting on the same terrain, I guess. So part of this has been a strong emphasis on internal education and discussion around what the Taylor Law is and why we should break it. We've had a number of events on this, some of them very like technical legal events, some of them talking about what it would take for us to actually break the Taylor Law. We just had one recently with Member Action Coalition, which is we're CUNY, which is City University of New York. There's also SUNY, which is the State University of New York. They have a rank and file group as well called Member Action Coalition. We've had a couple events with them, and including one recently where we had folks from states like us that have similar laws against public sector strikes. But these are educators who just recently went on strike where it's illegal and won good contracts because of it. So we're really pushing both for that internal educational piece, but also pushing for things like we got a strike readiness resolution passed in our delegate assembly. It was actually a great piece of coalitional work. We worked with a number of groups, created something called the Cross-Campus Strike Readiness Committee, and that resolution was passed. I would say, honestly, I'm really happy about all the work we've done on the Taylor Law, both on our campuses, tabling, all the literature we've made, all the events we've had. Probably not as successful in terms of the resolution, in part because you pass a resolution, but if your leadership is not with you politically, they sort of just can ignore a lot of what's in that resolution. So many of the specific provisions in there were not necessarily followed through on. As well as thinking about maintaining and fighting for a more militant CUNY and PSC, we fight a lot about internal democracy. And I think that's really important as we think about fighting for a different type of university, because we need our unions to be, spaces that are way different than the spaces that management provides. Top-down unions, unions where decisions are mostly made behind closed doors, those are the things that we hate about management. We should not be replicating those in our union spaces. And so the fight for internal democracy is incredibly important for us as well. The first and easy example that I can give is like, when we switched the delegate assembly to Zoom at the beginning of the pandemic. All right, the first couple were a shit show. That was fine. Everybody was figuring out the technology, no problem. But months later, we're still figuring out, why is Zoom a webinar format? Why is the chat locked down? Why is it that rank and file members who used to be able to not only go to the delegate assembly, but speak, even if they couldn't vote, if they weren't a delegate, they could speak at why weren't they even allowed into the Zoom room at that point? So we did things like, we created a Twitch account, and if you're familiar with Mystery Science Theater, we did a Twitch version of the DA where we actually streamed it. We had people providing commentary. Folks could ask questions to our commentators while the DA was going on, in the spirit of like, well, hey, if they're not going to open it up, we'll open it up for them. So we did things like that. We have been pushing for open bargaining really hard. Our next contract, which is coming up quickly because we were so far behind on the last one that it's about to expire, and we're going to go back into negotiations in the spring. We've been pushing for open bargaining. We've been doing tabling at our campuses. We have got a lot of literature. Similarly, we've been putting on events about open bargaining. Actually, we did a second event with Member Action Coalition, the SUNY folks, on open bargaining. We had one years ago with that same cross-campus strike committee on open bargaining. And again, it's like we don't want to live in a world where our union is replicating the behind closed doors decision-making that management does. We want a union that is open, that allows members to have as much input as possible into the decisions that are made in our unions. We also, as a group, have committed to going to a number of the Jane McAlevey trainings that have to do with open bargaining, because one of the things that we found in doing our one-on-one conversations, but also in dealing with the objections of our leadership is everybody's like, all right, open bargaining sounds great, but how do you actually do it? So actually going to these trainings and learning how the different unions have implemented open bargaining has been incredibly helpful as we move forward with this. So I know this one, though, will be a long-term goal. Fighting for internal democracy is always going to be a slow drip. And I think we have made some progress, but there's still a lot to do on that. As I only have a minute and a half left, I would be remiss, I have so many things to talk about, but I would be remiss to not talk about how important coalition building has been as we've gone forward. At the beginning of COVID, it was with folks like Cut COVID, Not CUNY. More recently, there's a CUNY for Abortion Rights group that's popped up. Free CUNY, which is a mostly student-run organization that fights for a free and fully funded CUNY. CUNY Against Racism and Colonialism. CUNY for Palestine, which is actually at my campus right now protesting because my president of my school is speaking at an anti-union Zionist organization who has popped up called CUNY for Inclusion, which is getting a bunch of people to drop out of the union because they're mad about a resolution that we passed in support of Palestine. We worked with the Bronx Action Committee. I mentioned Member Action Coalition. Recently, we started working with something called the Public Sector Rank and File Group, which includes not only folks in CUNY, but in UFT, MORE, Caucus, DC 37 Progressives, and other public sector groups, and others. I think this has been incredibly important as we have built and as we will continue to build forward as a group, because you cannot do it alone. And finally, I just want to say one really important thing that we do, it seems simple, but has been so vital, is that we have a newsletter that comes out every month, and it covers not just what we in RAFA are up to or want to talk about or want to, you know, get people in the union chatting about, but it covers a bunch of lefty groups within CUNY and what they've been up to in supporting each other's struggles. And so it really helps us continue to build that coalition work and support each other. Because again, that's the sort of thing that we have to do to build a different type of university to the one that we find ourselves in now. So tons more stuff I could say, but I'm over 10 minutes, so I'm going to shut up now and we'll talk at the beginning.
Okay, hi everyone. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Monica Panzarino. I'm on the NYU Adjunct Organizing Committee at ACT UAW Local 7902. So we actually just came off like a pretty big win. So we have a little bit of a different perspective. So I was thinking about how to talk about it, and I just came up with sort of a timeline of our activities. And but I just want to say that I'm just one person from the organizing committee. We had a lot of people involved. We have Chuck Gelman here tonight, who's also on our organizing committee. We had a lot of people on our bargaining committee, and so I'm just sort of giving my recollection and perspective of the timeline and the way things happen. So our 2016-2022 contract with NYU expired at midnight on October 31st. So we had a Halloween sort of party in the last bargaining session. We were all there. And it went very late into the night. We reached a tentative agreement with NYU at 3:30 in the morning on November 1st. And then adjuncts ratified the new contract on November 23rd, resoundingly with 1,533 yes votes and 20 no votes. So some of the gains in our new contract, adjuncts are receiving a 34% first year pay raise with additional raises each year throughout the next 6 years. We're receiving a flat sort of administrative pay fee similar to what CUNY has, that for the first time recognizes the work we do outside of the classroom, class prep, grading, office hours, etc. That was a huge thing for us in our bargaining sessions, was making sure that we were recognized for not only our contact hours, but the time that we spent outside of the classroom, something that I know is important to all part-time faculty. We received a $2,000 COVID payment for our work during the pandemic, which was long overdue. We were supposed to get $1,500 shortly after we converted our courses from in-person to online, and that never happened. So that $2,000 was very long overdue. Longevity pay, stronger job security, which means better reappointment rights. So after two semesters and 2 consecutive academic years, now we're guaranteed to get our classes, which is a huge thing for adjuncts. A 20% course cancellation fee. So if our course is canceled, we get a 20% payout of what we were supposed to be paid for that course. Better health insurance subsidies, retirement contributions, and more. So obviously we're all very happy about this new contract, and just very proud of the work that the bargaining committee did and the work that we all did together. Just a brief window into some of the organizing that we did. We began organizing our contract campaign in September of 2021. In the fall of 2022, we surveyed, fall of 2021, we surveyed adjuncts to ask what their most important issues were. So we sent out a survey just to try and get feedback and make sure that our adjuncts were telling us what they wanted. This was one way that we gathered this information through the survey, but their top 3 priorities were compensation, reappointment rights, and pay for training and other duties, meaning pay for the work we do outside of class and all the unpaid trainings we do. We began bargaining in April 14th, and we kicked off our first bargaining session with a rally, which culminated in Union Square outside of the window of 105 East 17th Street, which is where our bargaining sessions happened. The rally was fantastic. We had a lot of students and faculty out there in the rain holding up signs. So from the very first bargaining session, NYU management saw that we were there. They saw our presence. They saw the signs in the window. They knew that we meant business. Our bargaining committee met 26 times with NYU over the course of 7 months. I really wish we had someone from our bargaining committee here tonight to speak to bargaining a little bit better than I could, but I'll just say that our bargaining committee worked incredibly hard. There was a lot of disagreement on our bargaining committee. People didn't always agree, but in the end, people, everyone was working towards the same goal. Everyone wanted the best contract that we could possibly get. One of our adjuncts, Judith Sloan from Gallatin, organized a spring 2022 collective action letter to President Hamilton and collected 1,200 signatures from adjuncts on that letter, which was delivered in May to President Hamilton. One of the things that I worked on personally was our Contract Conversations Zoom meeting series, which was a meeting for rank and file adjuncts to come and again share more feedback about the contract, discuss the contract and what they wanted to see happen going forward. That was something that I didn't see our union doing, and I felt was super important that we were making sure that members had a voice in this process. So we had 19 of those meetings over the course of a year. Our organizing committee formed in May 2022, and one of the first things we did was created our campaign website, nyuosadjuncts.com. We kind of picked that slogan as we felt, especially for the pandemic. We worked so hard during the pandemic. We've all sacrificed so much in service to the university that NYU really owed us. So that was our slogan. Over the summer and into the fall, we hosted 10 cocktail conversations, which were in-person organizing socials at a bar in West Village. This was something that was really important because NYU is such a huge university. In any given semester, we have between 2,000 to 3,400 adjuncts in our unit. It's spread out all around the city and in Brooklyn, and our adjuncts are really disconnected. They really don't know each other very well. People from our own departments don't even know each other very well. I know for myself, you know, I don't even get invited to faculty meetings. We don't go to faculty meetings. So it was important to us that we were also meeting in person and kind of just socializing, drinking together and having kind of more informal meetings and getting bargaining updates. And I thought that those were really useful. On July 20th, we had another rally called the Rally for Wage Justice in Union Square, which was really great as well. I couldn't make it. I had COVID during that, but unfortunately, we had another big rally in Union Square and showed our presence outside the bargaining session as well. In August, we started what we called like quasi-open bargaining. We didn't do open bargaining in the style that New School is doing, like everyone on Zoom. We had some problems with NYU allowing us to do that. So what we did was we had like invitation. We had sort of like invitation open bargaining where we solicited people and send out invitations and we collected RSVPs and we brought people in. So we had adjuncts come to bargaining sessions to observe, but also give really powerful testimonials in the bargaining sessions, which I think made a huge difference in terms of making sure that NYU viewed us as human beings and people with, you know, finances and families and responsibilities, and they heard our stories, and you know, we suddenly, I think, became not just numbers on a page, you know, cost benefit analysis. We became human beings to them to whatever extent that we were able to do that. Towards the end of the summer, we made posters and we had a poster hanging event where we really tried to get into our adjunct offices. Again, it's a huge school. We have 145 adjunct offices around campus. So that was one of our goals, was to try and have a presence in these adjunct offices. In September 2022, just this fall, we started working on our strike authorization vote campaign. Strike authorization vote opened on September 26th. We had 5 strike authorization vote info sessions on Zoom so that we could answer all the rank and file questions. Okay, I'm almost at the end. Thanks. Over the course of 5 weeks, we worked on the campaign and we had roughly 40 adjuncts make hundreds and hundreds of calls to people. Strike authorization vote closed on October 21st. We had 1,571 adjuncts were eligible to vote. We had 1,137 voted, which was 72% of eligible members voted, which was a huge success for us. To have that 2/3 majority really made all the difference. 1,075 voted yes, 62 voted no, so we had 95% people vote yes. Our strike committee formed in October. We had 2 strike trainings, but we never really formally set a strike date. And then again, our bargaining ended on Halloween, October 31st, and we reached the tentative agreement with NYU at 3:30 in the morning. So that's just like some background. I'm happy to answer more questions about our organizing, but again, I think like having membership meetings was key. In person on Zoom, making sure the rank and file are being heard, and then open bargaining again was just like hugely important to have people in the room. And one of our main challenges, I'll just close by saying this, is that as part-time faculty, everyone is working multiple jobs, is hustling so hard, is working at multiple schools. You know, we have adjuncts that are teaching 7 classes, and just getting people involved was very, very challenging. It was extremely challenging. So having strike authorization vote and giving people something really pressing and really, you know, dire that they had to, you know, we need phone calls on this. That really was how we were able to motivate people in the end, was to be involved with strike authorization vote. So anyhow.
Perfect, thanks. Can people, I think, can hear me. So I'm Eun, I'm a member of Student Workers of Columbia, local 2710 of UAW. I guess the story I'm gonna tell is gonna be maybe, depending how you see it, but a bit less exciting than what other speakers have been telling, because what I'm gonna talk about is mainly about how our experience has been like after the strike ended in January 2021. So we struck from November 2020 to about like January 2021, we struck for about 2 months. And we won our first contract, which actually included major wins in most of our demands. We won a very strong recognition article, relatively speaking, which includes, so our unit does not include just graduate student workers, but also all undergrads and like casual workers. We also won a procedure for neutral arbitration for discrimination and harassment cases. We had expanded health benefits and increased compensation, etc. So I'm not going to bore you with those details, but so now we won a contract and our strike ended. And since the end of our strike, basically we've been faced with like 2 major tasks. The first one is that now we have to set up a new local because UAW kind of decided for us that we're going to be our own local instead of joining an existing one, with all the administrative tasks and hurdles that comes with. And also, second, we have to like start implementing the contract that we want. And frankly, tackling these tasks with the very limited resources that we had, like we didn't have any staff, and we're volunteer run, and we couldn't hire staff yet because we haven't collected dues yet. Was quite hard, especially also with the level of engagement, which had nothing to compare during the peak engagement throughout the strike. Basically, I mean, it dwindled. But I think nonetheless, all things considered, I think a few of us were very committed, knew that this beginning period was very important in sort of setting up the right infrastructure and the right culture in order to continue the kind of like democratic organization to which we're committed throughout the strike. And without this kind of like sense of urgency deter us. So I think each time Columbia tried to continue to exploit our labor, violate our contract, or discipline us by telling us basically that we can't run the union the way we wanted to run it, that other unions don't run it this way, I think we picked up all of these fights and fought back. So for example, we didn't let any contract violation go unnoticed, even those which, depending on your political orientation, you might seem as being a bit minor, such as like late pay. We held the line that Columbia can continue to try to diminish the size of our bargaining units because they keep still trying to exclude workers from the unit, even though our recognition, even if that's in violation of our recognition article. So we ended up filing a union clarification petition to the National Labor Relations Board, and the court proceedings are going to start soon. We also called out the university's attempt to arbitrarily reclassify workers in order to exclude them from some contract benefits. That's still happening. And we refuse, and this is actually a fight that we're waging right now, and we continue to refuse to meet with the university because they're basically started trying to shut out members from grievance meeting, union management committee meetings, etc. Totally unilaterally, totally departing from our past practices of having open bargaining. So we're waging that fight right now too. So I think this fight sort of set the tone and established a precedent for our relationship with the university under our contract, sort of laying necessary groundworks for our union to remain a fighting one. Now, to be honest, it's true that the way these fights have been conducted, especially for some of us who are explicitly like socialists, was a bit frustrating and a little bit more, and came with a little bit of disillusionment, because these were not the kind of like massive fights that we waged throughout the strike. They were picked up because a few community organizers like us picked them up. And this, I think, faces socialists like us with the question of like, okay, we did these things because it's the right thing to do it. We have a contract, we need to implement it. But what's the point of implementing the contract if people engage with it with the attitude that we're not doing this because we're trying to fight back against the exploitation of our labor, but and sort of like in the process of like organizing for these issues become politically conscious of their effect of exploitation, if it doesn't give any more the people this kind of sense that they're actually engaging in some kind of political fight, but they're just like following something because some organizers tell them to do, or going along with that. What's the point of my engagement in the union? And I think one other thing that we learned very quickly too is that Sam was talking about how they're basically being, fighting with the UAW bureaucracy. We actually had the exact same fight, which led to, we actually voted down a contract. And the reason why our strike was so democratic was because we basically like organized against them and, and like actually led a rank and file led strike. So it wasn't necessarily very successful. And I think many people got politicized in the process of what it means to be a rank and file union. But I think our experience after the end of the strike demonstrates more than ever that, a union which is non-bureaucratic and which is not dominated by this administrative caucus of UAW does not equate actually a militant rank and file union. We're still like the level of engagement is really low. And to be honest, the political education is still something that's like very lacking in our union. And it definitely does makes us question whether if we go this path of like relying on like maybe like a few radical organizers, what actually differentiates us from like a service union where the vast majority of the membership is disengaged and demobilized and are not actually engaging in this union with the same kind of attitude that I have, which is that I want to reimagine what a union could be, and I want to see it in continuity with broader political and socialist struggles. So, I mean, these are, to be honest, the questions we've been faced with, and I don't think any of us have any good answer with that. But I think at the same time that we have the infrastructure, a democratic infrastructure, and we have few community organizers who are trying to like think about these issues. And I think being able to convey to the people that actually this period in between contracts, where we're not striking anymore, there are ways in which we could still reimagine what this period could be politically. I think that's something that we have to like grapple with. And am I okay with time actually? Yeah. Okay. And I mean, to give very concrete examples, one of the things that we're doing is, I mean, for instance, this like open meeting things, right? Why is that? Why does that matter? Like, why does it matter that when you have a grievance meeting scheduled with the university that this should be open? But it's also because, I mean, it's an extremely like great tool for making people politically conscious, like in the same way that open bargaining was, right? And I think, especially in like a university workplace setting like us, where we don't really have a shop floor, right? Like we don't have a place where coworkers coming together and like talk about their working conditions, etc. Those kind of things which remind us that we're workers and that we're being exploited by the university are extremely important. Like having this kind of conversations and having this kind of campaign, which are like in some sense like more politically education-y. I think those are important. But also, whenever there's like a contract violation, instead of approaching it with the attitude that like, oh, here's a contract violation, it violates this section of our like contract, right? That's fine, but our contract is okay, but it's not like great. So instead of approaching as a contract violation issue, trying to make demands that they would actually change the workplace in a way which does not just implement our current contracts, but tries to like reimagine it in a way that you would actually want, like approaching the grievance procedure like that. So these are the kind of things that we're kind of trying to do. We're very few, but I think actually, yeah, I think these are questions that actually any union should be thinking about after striking. So yeah, that's.
I could have done that, but I was like afraid of it. Hi, I'm Dianca. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm a permanent teacher voice, so I call me fine on that front. I also feel like it's important to preface that I'm so exhausted because we were all on Zoom from 9 a.m. I think on Monday, I want to say, until 4:30 in the morning on Tuesday. And then on and off of just being between Zoom, the picket line, all of the different ways that we've been trying to kind of collectively be present together as a community, as the new school, for those of us who are the 87% part-time faculty, but also for those who are in solidarity with us our full-time faculty colleagues, staff, our students, of course, who are in the UC in a way they've never been before. So hopefully they're having fun finding new corners of the UC and friendship and community together. I think it's important too to preface that in addition to being a union sibling to NYU and in solidarity with all these great folks, I'm also an alum of the New School. So I feel like so much of what this journey of this experience of not only being a part of the bargaining committee, but being a part-time faculty member who's never been on strike before, being relatively new in my career as an adjunct, as an educator. I've been at the New School since, I think, as a part-time faculty member since right before the pandemic. So I think 2019. So there's all these different things that feel like I shouldn't be the person speaking even right now. And all of those things are not true. But I think that there's something really, I think that each of you touched on that I really admire, not only in the cautionary of it, but also the possibility and expansiveness of what it means to reimagine what a union looks like, to reimagine what the university looks like, and to kind of let ourselves fall away from these like strict sort of boundaries or frameworks that we've inherited because they don't work. And we stick to them because we're afraid. And what happens when we're pushed past that point of fear where you're just like, well, everything I was afraid of already happened, so let's dream up something different. And I feel like so many people get to that point either because of exhaustion or joy or anger or all of those things at one time together. When you're going through the bargaining process, when you get the ink dries on your contract, when that ratification vote finally clears and you post all the selfies and you send each other emojis and you're super happy, and then how do you keep building that momentum? And I feel like it's funny that I'm sitting between the two of you because I feel like I'm temporarily in between both sides of where you're at. So I think in terms of what's going on at the New School, I feel like it's so uniquely New School in a way that I feel like even though management is not my favorite community corner of the New School right now, I think that at least they can be grateful that it is very much so a strike and a collaborative community moment of threshold and shift that is very specific to even the origins of the New School. And I feel like so many of us as people who are part of higher ed and academics, creatives, activists, we know that dissonance of being in communities and being in solidarity or being in coalition and collaboration with one another, and people saying that their politics are one thing, but they practice them in a totally different way, or because there might be something going on in the world that's larger that we have to then shelve our grievances or our frustrations, or we have to look away from that hypocrisy. And one of the things that I felt so grateful for moving into stepping into the role of leadership, which I feel weird of even saying that, like being on the bargaining committee, I'm like, how did I get here? I just moved to New York to get my MFA, and here I am like years later on this panel, exhausted and like waiting for the next chapter of what's happening in bargaining. But I feel like it really made me realize that like the power is really within each of us, with each of us who are not necessarily at the top, right? That it can be a bargaining committee that is like 20 plus people, because we are a large percentage of the faculty at the New School. So we have a very large bargaining committee. But even in our early moments of kind of collaborating with each other and getting to know each other, we figured out community principles, community guidelines. We figured in the same way that we do with our students, right? When we're in seminar or in studio. And we also figured out different ways of what will opening bargaining look like for us. We didn't want it to be bureaucratic. We didn't want it to be where only bargaining committee members get to speak and our members don't get to know. We didn't want to have even sometimes when we've had to create a breakout room for some reason, it's always like the shortest, smallest moment of separation between us and everybody else. And usually it's only because of like wanting to make sure that people who are sharing vulnerable information have space to do that. But even with that, like we spend so much time just kind of thinking about what are the rules, and we have to vote on the rules as members together, right? So even thinking about how we've had to shift and kind of grow as we've moved through this long journey. I mean, like as many of you probably know, because of our amazing organizing team and all the folks who are helping out with that, we're pretty good at letting everybody know what's going on. So we came to the table, we asked the university to come to the table in late spring. We asked them in April, they didn't come. We asked them in May, they're like, nope. We asked them again in June and they came like the last week of June. And then we started meeting once a week, but even though we were meeting with the university once a week, we were also, and again, this was open bargaining, so people who wanted to join in could. Of course, the numbers were a little light because it was the middle of summer and we were just starting off. But as that went on, like definitely the tone shifted when they realized that we weren't just a bunch of, scrappy, random, like part-time faculty from all different corners of the university, but we actually have done a lot of research. We were spending a lot of hours outside of the time that we spent with the university, kind of looking at other contracts, kind of creating, at first I felt like we were kind of creating some sort of Frankenstein contract that like we wanted to like resurrect into real life, but it was really cool to see the things that were possible, right? Not only just in terms of like compensation and healthcare and job security, but also like pedagogical principles, curricular input, even thinking about some of the language around pronouns in the contract, or even thinking about the fact that we really need to think about how can we talk about bias when it comes to student evaluations. And so there's like all these different things that we're kind of considering, because not only are those things that educators should be entitled to so that we can make the university what it's meant to be, but if at any school it should happen at the new school. And so I feel like that's one of the main things that I felt like was super exciting, to kind of not only to be able to be in community alongside so many of my colleagues who are all different sort of corners of disciplines and departments and different colleges that are represented on the bargaining committee, but also to be able to kind of see generationally sort of that long arc, that long narrative, right? For people who've just joined in, people who maybe have been teaching for almost as long as I've been alive, which is, I'm like, that's amazing. Maybe if we get a contract, I can do that. I can be that person for the future at the new school. But I think that it was just really exciting because it gave me this deeper sense of being a part of this community and dreaming what it could possibly look like. But another component of it that really, I think every time where we got really frustrated or wounded by the university and all of their wonderful tactics that they've used to try to break us, union busting at the new school, who knew? We've got patches about it now, so I guess it's happened. It will hopefully never happen again. But I think that seeing what the students have brought to the table has absolutely blown me away. Even when we were in those early phases of trying to plan for what do we want this contract to look like, as we started doing some of the many modalities that you all mentioned, like sending out surveys to members, doing information sessions, getting different social media campaigns together, having events, meeting up in the park during the summer, the Rally for Respect. We had like students help collaborate with us to make a sort of, what was it, a symbolic funeral to bury the progressive values of the new school. And then I was asked to lead a seance to resurrect the progressive values, which I think are actually, when we did the seance, I think the spirit went into the UC. So I guess it's in there right now with all the students. But I think that even that spring semester, right before we started asking the university to come to the table with us, there was this little group of students who are now at the helm leading this fully formed collaborative group, student faculty solidarity group. And they were first years at that time. They came into the new school during the hardest time of what it was to be a student, to be a freshman. And they made that group, they made that community, and they collaborated with us. They reached out and asked us questions when we were just starting to figure out, like, how do you even format a proposal? Like, what's redlining? Like, what do we do with this? Oh, we didn't put the page number. We were still figuring out the mechanics of what we were as a bargaining committee. And our students were teaching us really so many new ways into collaboration, and also thinking about dissent. What does that look like, right? I think in the same way that so many of us, when we were dealing with like coming up with our contract, and then that question around compensation, or the how do we get money for outside of the contact hour? How do we get them to even acknowledge that that exists? And then thinking like, oh, it's too much, it's too provocative, we can't ask for that. And then our students just like kind of just like turning up the fire and being like, do it, let's do this. Like, we're mad on your behalf, like, let's go. And I feel like so much of their spirit, it's so unbridled from the jadedness of academia. And it is so beautiful and so refreshing. And it has kept us so much stronger. I mean, we are strong, but we are stronger because of our students. And I feel like it just reminds me, even seeing them today on the picket line, and then of course, seeing what they're doing right now in the UC, to me, it's just like, that's what the university should be like. It is not managements, as our mediator calls them. It's not for management. It is not for the admin. It is not for the bloated sort of income of the presidents, of the provosts, of the trustees who never step foot on campus, who have no clue what classes are being taught, have no idea how empowering it is to be in the classroom and be really fully seen and heard. It's not for them. It's for staff, it's for faculty, it's for students, it's for those who are alum, people who come into that space and keep it vibrant, keep it just. And if I can't even imagine how the new school trustees feel right now, but they should be proud as hell that we're keeping the spirit of the school alive on the picket line, in conversations like this. And I feel like, to me, it seems irresponsible to be part-time faculty, to be an adjunct, to be in higher ed, and not fight for something better, for something more equitable, for something more just, because then what are we telling our students? Why would we want them to sit in class and listen to us, and for them to fall in love with theory or art or creative writing or whatever their practice is, whatever their discipline is, to figure out their politics, to embody it, have them come into that space to be told that it's not theirs, unless if they have privilege, or unless if they can like live on a really small wage and have another job somewhere else. You shouldn't have to pay to be there. It's a democratic space. And so I feel like, you know, of course, play nice, be fair. Don't commit crimes that are overtly crimes. I don't know. Do whatever you have to do, but do it together, right? And learn from each other. And I feel like we've learned so much from our students, because I feel like we've been, as everyone is when you're in these like moments of negotiation, we've really had a hard time. But today our students reminded us to keep pushing, and we're doing it for them as much as we are doing it for ourselves.
Okay, so thank you all. We want to open up now for discussion, so we'll try to keep it brief, like not speak too much, because we don't have that much time, but we want to give at least half an hour for some discussion and ideas, and also remind the people that are on Zoom that they can get also on Stack, because we also have a bunch of people on Zoom. So whoever wants to start, are you going to be taking Stack? No? Oh, you were going to take a Stack on Zoom? I can, okay. As people prepare to say things, just a brief comment. The people who organize this is the Tempest Collective, of which I am a member of as well. We are a revolutionary socialist organizing group, and we also have our website, which is Tempest Mag. So there you can read all of our publications, and also at the end we're gonna be passing a hat for the space. So if anybody wants to contribute to be able to pay for this space that we are using today, it's more than welcome. And how does it Steve, are you there?
Are we doing Stack?
David and Steve, you're on
Yeah.
Stack. Okay.
Okay, great. Thanks. Thanks, everybody. This was outstanding. My name's David Latwin. I'm on the executive board of the Rutgers Adjunct Faculty Union, and I'm an adjunct myself. And I just had a quick question for Sam. Apologies, Sam. I had some audio issues when you were first starting to speak, and I don't want to make you say the same stuff you already said, but I understand this idea that there's a majority of 10 on the bargaining committee can you just explain a little bit who that 10 is again, and how did they get to be the majority on the committee?
Sam, do you want to respond?
Sure, yeah. So so basically we have 10 campuses, right? And each campus selects 2 people to be on the bargaining team. And these 2 people are already from the stewards of that campus. So basically, like, the chair and the secretary of each campus become bargaining team members, and the chair and the secretary are elected in our membership elections, which, if I'm not mistaken, are every 2 years. So a lot of these people, usually, like, during a normal year, there is very little activity in the union. So when I was a head steward, the election was uncontested. So I just, like, there was no one there. So I just said, I want to do this, and I was elected. And in other campuses, usually the election, like 200, 300 people participate, if there is a contested election. So this is how these people were elected. Ideologically, a lot of them have essentially been groomed since 2000, for those who've been here since 2016, but a lot of them have graduated. So since 2018, many have been groomed by the administrative caucus of UAW. So, like, over the past years, many of these people who are on bargaining team members, like, when I was involved, I knew them and I would see them at our collective meetings. Like, these are the same people who, for example, when UAWD had put forward a 1 member, 1 vote election in UAW, so we brought that on our local, and, like, these same people opposed it. And at the time, like, for example, they argued that 1 member, 1 vote is not democratic, right? And somehow they made that into an argument. Yeah, so there have been, like, many of them have been involved for years. Quite a few of them have, like, aspirations to become staff later in UAW. 2 of them actually just recently became staff and are now sitting on our bargaining team as, like, consultative staff people, right? And these are hardcore administrative caucus people. The main staff member who is in charge, and this is not a student, so this is like an old-time staff member, his name is Mike Miller, and he's actually soon to become a regional director, I think. He's someone who in the 90s would beat up rank and file people in Santa Barbara, like, physically, to get them to do what the administrative caucus wanted. So yeah, those are essentially that 10 people. And the only reason, this is one of the points I was trying to make, is that they have the opposition from the other 9 is really the result of the wildcat strikes of 2 years ago. So if those wildcat strikes weren't there, the administrative caucus would even have a bigger majority in our bargaining team, probably something like, I don't know, 15 or 16 members. Yeah.
Thank you, Sam. That was clarifying. Thank you.
Does anybody in the room want to speak? Yes, Steve. Okay, Steve.
Hi, yeah, Steve Lee from Seattle Revolutionary Socialist. Thanks very much for this. This is very interesting. Yeah, my question kind of goes off of the last question. Since the UAW administrative caucus lost the last election for the most part, has that had any impact on any of the UAW academic locals? And do you expect it to have any impact in the future? Thanks.
So that's been too, like, it just happened, right? I think it's too early for it to have any impact on us. However, there is one impact in that there is the possibility, if we vote no, and if we can vote no, as I said, I don't know if rank and file is organized enough, but people are pissed off. For UAW leadership to decide whether they're going to continue paying us or not. And in that vote, I think the recent success of UAWD could matter and could have an impact. But outside of that, like, I don't think someone like Mike Miller, who is the regional director here, like can be recalled tomorrow, or someone else be put in his place tomorrow, or any of the staff here can change like rapidly. So I think we are stuck with the people that we have for this contract. Yeah.
Aaron, were you on stack? And Lee? I know. Yeah. You have to go. Yeah.
Well, I'd actually be interested to hear if others have comments about the internal UAW elections. I don't know. I'm happy to ask my question now, but I'm curious.
Sure, I actually attended, so we are part of Region 9A, which I think includes New School and NYU too. And so the UAW won the regional director elections too. I mean, to be honest, to me, it's like huge. This caucus has been there and it's been controlling our apparatus for like 70 years or something. That was the last time they lost their elections. And although for us, it doesn't mean concretely, at least like within our local much, because we basically have been operating without staff for since I strike. But I think, I mean, this is, and to be honest, I also don't think that the UAW caucus actually thought they were going to win. So how that concretely looks like, I think a lot of things are not being settled now, but I think especially with people who are like, you know, working in, for instance, like a regional level, there are many things that have never been made into democratic spaces within like UAW bureaucracy. So thinking about like how we can change that, how we can start to like occupy those spaces and make those spaces actually spaces where locals get together and have like meaningful like political discussions. I think that's gonna be really interesting too. But yeah, I think, yeah, and I think it's still in the open, but I wouldn't say that like I think there's an opportunity that we have to like organize, like to actually make that happen. Yeah.
So first of all, this is an amazing panel because it's just incredible to see the broad sort of sweep of the struggles. I mean, it really is incredible. The sort of the different places, the different struggles are in, and the sort of broader fight in higher ed labor is incredible. My name is Aaron. I'm a labor lawyer here in the city for one of the big public sector unions. I'm also a member of Tempest, and I'm on the editorial board of the magazine. So if we're always looking for reporting and analysis of stuff going on. So if people have writing, we just want to open the website for people to share their experiences, and you can find ways to submit stuff on the website. I have my question is sort of based on what we're seeing here is also a reflection of a broader kind of sweep of labor struggles in the country on the one hand, and both my personal experience working in the unions, but what we see with UAW and the sort of the UAWD, the rise of an insurgent slate, the relative weakness of the traditional unions and the business unions to sort of address the really acute economic and social crisis that working people are facing in this country, and that's reflected. I mean, I think with the exception of the NYU victory is an incredible thing, but it's also hard won over a decade, 15, 20 years of struggle. And so you have that on the one hand, and then on the other hand, you also have the kind of the sort of structural limitations of the unions themselves, the roles that they play. And it strikes me like that the capacity to build, networks of higher ed organizers across campuses, the ability to build networks of organizers across sectors, and also the kind of need to build spaces, political spaces outside of the unions themselves, however important, centrally important those struggles are, the need to kind of advocate. And I appreciate the sort of comments about the building of united fronts and solidarity. I'm just curious and I know it's hard in the midst of some of these fights. I'm curious to what extent you're sort of actively seeing those openings. I mean, we sort of see it here with these spaces, but I'm curious to sort of what extent you're seeing these networks, these other spaces opening up outside of the specific union struggles.
I mean, I'll just say briefly, I spent Saturday at the People's Forum with the public sector rank and file group, which is CUNY, DC 37, UFT, NISNA, Boyda, who else am I missing here? I don't know, a couple other groups. And there's a huge opportunity now because all of those contracts are coming up right now. And you know, whether the group formed with enough time to really have a huge impact, but like the idea that there's a group that's trying to think of collective demands that they can get, that they can press in each union, especially when pattern bargaining means that the first one that settles is going to fuck over everybody else, is really exciting. And you know, I do think that there are a lot, people are looking for creative ways to address these when they're not able to necessarily get in the room to address them within their own unions. And think about like, all right, well, like, yeah, if there's a caucus in UFT and a caucus in DC 37, and they're both want to push their leaderships, but it's easy to marginalize them. Their voice is amplified, you know, you by working together, if you're working for collective demands, think of the opportunity to expand your voice, because we are not just fighting within our unions, we're fighting within the city and the state and these other spaces. So I do think that there are quite a few opportunities for that. Like I'm really excited that we're working with the SUNY union. I mean, the idea that our comrades in the SUNY union, like we should have some collective and united goals for free education in New York State, and it doesn't make sense just to fight for that for CUNY. I mean, I will say that's actually maybe one thing I will say in favor of my union leadership is they've been doing a better job recently of working with UUP leadership, but we're pushing for something maybe slightly different than what they're pushing for. So yeah, I'm excited about the possibilities, and I think you're right to think about that as being incredibly important, not just thinking within, but how we make those connections.
So I think one thing that along those lines, I think that that's something that's come up so much, like not even, I mean, of course we thought of it more in a very like romantic kind of poetic way in the beginning when we were just like young, fresh faced people walking into negotiations, like excited to see that Google Calendar alert rather than, you know, just like, oh yes, there's like 2 hours where I'm not bargaining and the rest of the day is just bargaining. I love it. But I think that one thing that we were thinking about too is just like, you know, we didn't think that we'd end up being, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong because I'm exhausted, but like we didn't think we'd make history of being like on strike for so long as like adjuncts. And we didn't think that people would, I mean, we knew that like in New York, of course, because the new school is kind of connected to so many other sort of progressive spaces, academic spaces, creative spaces in this region alone. But thinking about what you were saying, like there are a lot of contracts on our campus that are coming up due soon, a lot that were kind of, you know, extended because of the pandemic. And now it's time and we all need a lift, right? Collectively. And then there's a lot of communities on campus who should unionize, but have been afraid to, even on a campus like the new school, even without even having ever had a contract before. And so I think that thinking about how we can collectively always be in sort of community with each other and in conversation and like collaborating and imagining what that would look like is so important, because it's like with each step, we're kind of chipping away at that compliance, that silence, the fear, and also sort of this expectation that we're just going to sit there and take it. So I feel like that's just something that I'm really excited to see as we move past the point of where we're at, which is kind of like the boiler point. It does feel like a season finale of some sort, but when we get that ink signed on the contract, I'm excited because we're already talking now about how can we help student workers when their contract comes up? How can we help with the jazz folks when theirs goes up? And then what about the student health workers? Like, what about that? And then also the thing that I was going to forget to say, and I'll say really quickly, is that full-time faculty needs to unionize. Full-time faculty needs to unionize. And I feel like there's so many folks who I admire. They're brilliant. Their hearts are so big. They like come into the classroom with everything for their students. And they are overworked too. And they're given tenure, they're given sabbaticals, they're given offices, copier machines that work. But that's not enough. If you're working yourself to the bone and you're still not being able to really be present with your family, with your life outside of the university, to go into your research, to not feel like you can't step up politically without being slapped on the wrist, right? Or slapped on the wrist, or like even so many faculty, full-time faculty now still stand in solidarity with us. And right now I feel like AAUP, they're doing a great job on our campus of kind of being that space for full-time faculty. But when the new school came saying like, how many of you are gonna choose to come back to work? We need people to grade things. And many of them are still standing in solidarity with us, but they threatened to cut their pay too. They threatened to cut their healthcare too. So tenure doesn't save anybody, right? So I feel like the future that I'm looking for is like where we are all unionized, every single inch, every corner of the university, because otherwise management, administration, they're going to play games because we live in a capitalistic reality until we topple it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
This is not so much about across sectors, but I think something that's really challenging for part-time faculty and adjuncts around the country is the visibility issue, that people don't know that this is going on. People just, your average person who doesn't work in higher ed or doesn't know about this just hears professor and thinks, you're paid well, you're tenured. They equate it with like the salary of a doctor and a lawyer. So I know a few years back, there was a national adjunct walkout day that happened. And that's something that I've been thinking about. And I feel like maybe having a regional adjunct walkout day or just some way of organizing that. And if it was national, that'd be great too. But just raising visibility to the issue. I think most people know like K through 12 teachers, some of the struggles they go through financially and with supplies, but people don't even know that this is happening. So that was one of the most exciting things for me getting involved with this, was just raising the visibility and sharing our struggle with people, and letting people know that we struggle, and we're so exploited so badly. So yeah, not across sectors, just more of a higher ed kind of way of organizing.
We have Lee on staff.
Okay, I'm up here, right?
Yeah, so people can hear you on Zoom. Still by modal.
Funny little setup here. Okay, all right. So I'm like speaking right at the people I'm asking questions here. So hi everybody. So I had it kind of a general question, but also particularly for you, Dianca, because being on strike, but I was thinking about the theme of neoliberalism and this kind of panel, and it's just listening to what you guys are talking about, and particularly seeing the way like the posture that the new school has taken just throughout this process, like you described. It's incredibly sort of compelling and shocking in the way in which, but I think it's true. I mean, the new school, it's because of the new school's history and sort of purported vision and all of that, but so there's this sharp contradiction. But generally, I mean, higher ed is in theory supposed to be a place where you sort of carve out space for ideas and so on. So these class questions are now kind of, which I guess what neoliberalism is about, is sort of running right through these struggles. And it's just, I've been thinking a lot about the railway workers strike and how this is happening at the same time when the strike is just this potential, the non-strike got shut down. And I'm just wondering if, particularly at the new school or just in general, I mean, how is this reverberating, like the way the administration taking such a hard line and I mean, with today, right, like benefits cut off and pay being withheld. I mean, these are the kind of approaches that I feel like in higher ed, when I went to college I'm not even going to say, many years ago, and it's just, you couldn't even really kind of conceptualize that sort of approach? Not that class inequality or struggle isn't lurking beneath the surface, but how is this being talked about and understood? Like, what is the new school administration trying to accomplish, and what's their sort of, you know, like, what are they driving at, and how do people how are people receiving that and understanding that in those terms? So I don't know if that was a little vague, but I'm really, and solidarity and strength to you all.
Just 1 second, I'll give you, so we'll go back to you so you can answer that one, and then we'll just take everybody who's left on stack and then go back to the panelists because of a question of time. So just so everybody knows, so if you want to get on stack now. People on Zoom, I don't know who I'm talking to here.
I'll be really brief. I think I don't know what administration's doing. I think they're being creative at the least. One thing I will say though is that I think that one of the things that's really fascinating about the reality that we all live in, the accountability that we all have to hold with each other because of how much transparency there is because of the internet, because of the way that we can be interconnected, even if we're not necessarily in New York or in a particular university's community. I think a good example of what I'm trying to say is that the provost at the new school sent out an email, I want to say either between sometime late in the afternoon yesterday and this morning, and she included, Provost White included a quote from Bell Hooks, who, as many people know, was a scholar in residence many years over. And I was so grateful to get to see Hooks kind of give lectures and teach-ins at the new school when I was a student there during my MFA. But she used a quote that, on the surface, a beautiful, fine quote. We love all of Hooks' pedagogy. She's fire always. But people clapped back immediately of how sort of misplaced that was, and how much of a kind of bending or manipulating the intention of Hooks' philosophy, of her work, of her scholarship, of her activism. And also, that's a really hard place to be, not only as a scholar at an institution like the New School, to have that call out or call in from your community, but even more so because Provost White is also a Black academic. And so I feel like there are these questions of identity and how we can use that as a weapon to kind of hide behind our hypocrisy. And I feel like I was actually really grateful for a lot of the Black scholars and academics who have called Provost White out about it. But I also want to say, because I haven't gotten to say this anywhere else, that we also need to call out the trustees of the New School for using McBride and Provost White as tokens. And not enough people have talked about that, because that's also a really interesting place to kind of sit in and talk about. But that is also a strategic tool of these higher education communities. If we have someone who comes from a diverse intersection of identity, they can be the speaker piece. And yes, they might also be a part of that machine of capitalism and of silencing dissent. But in a way, we can only say so much, because we don't want to come off as being, racist or classist or all these other things, right? So I feel like there's another insidiousness to what the administration's doing, even to the people that are on their side of the table, that shows how little value they actually have for not only the ethos of their legacy as an institution, but also the people who they call their stewards and keepers of their truth. So I don't know if that's like an answer, but I feel like, I don't know what they're doing. They're sending a lot of emails. That's the short answer.
Okay, so we're gonna do a last round of interventions. Let's see. So we got Nicola first, then Kirsten from Zoom, Nicola and Kirsten, then Hakan, and then Michael. I don't know if anybody else. No? Okay, and then we'll go back to you guys if you want any closing remarks.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for this panel. My name is Nicola Walters. I'm a lecturer at Cal Poly Humboldt. I'm the chair of membership and organizing for the California Faculty Association and interim steering committee member for Higher Ed Labor United. And I just wanted to sort of my thinking was where this conversation had shifted. So I was sort of uncertain as to how I wanted to pose a question to you all. But really what I wanted to say is that I really appreciate the strength that you all are sharing and the resilience during this time of intense action that so many of you are locked into. I have colleagues at the new school who I've been in communication with. I work with folks in the UC. I know that y'all are doing so much, and here we are I'm on Pacific Standard Time, so I'm not even on East Coast time, and y'all are doing some long hours. So I really appreciate you talking about these sort of opportunities that you all are looking for how locked into your own respective struggles, you're also looking for the opportunities for collective action. The reason I wanted to speak up is just because I do work with Higher Ed Labor United, which is an organization that came out of a panel 2 years ago, just like this. And I can't really say it came out solely from that panel, I guess, but it came out from a panel on the neoliberalization of higher education and the labor organizing that was building out of COVID-19 actions. You know, those kinds of opportunities that administrations were using to capitalize on our you know, inability to protect our interests in times of uncertainty. And so I guess I'm just hoping that y'all will be in conversation with us at some point. I say us as a sort of loose term, but Higher Ed Labor United broadly, because it sounds like through your all's answering of the question that I had of, you know, have you all been looking at some of these opportunities to really bring these types of challenges across, you know, that we're facing coast to coast, wall to wall all together, that really our opportunity to win real gains in higher education comes through collective action. So this is kind of a plug for Higher Ed Labor United, but also a gratitude statement towards all of y'all, and just I guess putting this all into everyone's thinking of perhaps maintaining that question of how do we look for these moments in our own work to continue to embolden the fire that is building in higher education, that is recognizing the strength of our unity across the country. So thank you all for this panel this evening.
Okay, now we're gonna go with Kirsten.
Yeah, hi comrades. My name's Kristen. I use they, she pronouns. I'm a member of Tempest, and I'm a staff member at the University of Arizona. I'm in the UCW Arizona Union, and we don't have bargaining power, but the union was created at the in Tucson at U of A because of a movement that was built around kicking Border Patrol and ICE off campus to protect undocumented students. So that's the context for that. But just recently, my boss, basically the administrator over all of diversity and inclusion, called the cops on a Black disabled student. And so it was really an important time for the union to figure out how to take up anti-racism work and abolition work while also fighting for labor rights. And it was honestly very difficult. So I guess my question for the panel is how has like anti-racism and abolition work been taken up on the picket line when people are striking, when people are bargaining and in those meetings? Because like we know that, you know, when we're in struggle, it's really when we're able to like connect the dots and build solidarity. I know someone gave the example of like, okay, well now we're writing this contract, what does it mean for pronouns? So just like more examples like that when it comes to kicking Border Patrol off campus, kicking ICE off campus, taking money from police on campuses and giving it to students and staff and faculty. So yeah, I'd love to hear any examples of what that struggle has looked like and connecting the dots between like anti-racism, labor work, and abolition.
Hi, I'm Hakan. I have a CUNY specific question for Gerry, with whom I see just basically a few times a week. But we usually just say hi. But anyway, so you mentioned sort of how 7K strike evolved into Rafa, but I'm curious because I was like involved during 7K strike at John Jay campus. And then I actually feel much less optimistic about CUNY like during this contract because of a few things that changed. I feel like there are less adjuncts now. And I feel like since the last contract, although it wasn't like a win, it did increase pace substantially. I feel like that 7K strike momentum is like a little bit weaker because we used to be paid so much lower in comparison to everyone else in the city. And I also feel like you mentioned that there was a resolution passed at the Delegate Assembly about strike. I don't know when that happened, but I get the sense that last time there was like uniform opposition to strike from like PSC leadership versus like, I feel like since that last contract, there has been like some people on the left of sort of PSC leadership who have kind of had this like halfway strike position, which I feel personally like the current leader of the PSC chapter, who actually wasn't really part of 7K strike, had this weird position where it's just like, oh, but I do support a strike, but like kinda. So I wonder how you feel about how PSC leadership sort of changed their position since the last contract.
Michael? Yeah.
Yeah, let me, there you go. Hello, Michael from CUNY. Several of you have mentioned open bargaining. My question is to all of you, and specifically to Gerry. The union leadership at CUNY, the PSC leadership, would claim that they do open bargaining. Right? They would say that, well, we invite people to meeting, we invite people to sessions. So what is your vision of open bargaining? What would it look like, right? Say at CUNY, for example. And even though Rafa is mostly adjunct, as far as I can tell, am I correct, or a lot, right? I think if you were able to articulate a clear vision of open bargaining as opposed to what's being done now, that would resonate among full-timers too. Right? So I'd be interested to hear you and anyone else who can give a full picture of what open bargaining means.
Okay, so we kick it back to the speakers. Let's try to keep it to 2-3 minutes, maybe short, because we only have 15 minutes left. Should we do the same order as the start? Yeah, it's fine with you. So Sam can start.
All right, you guys hear me? Okay, so I mean, regarding the last point, open bargaining, at least the way it's supposed to work here, is that when our bargaining team meets with the UC, there is also a open Zoom account where 500 rank and file members just join and listen to what's happening. But our bargaining team, despite rank and file requests, has also made a lot of sidebars and closed door meetings where not even all the bargaining team members can sometimes go to, because the in-person meetings happen in Irvine, where many bargaining team members aren't present, particularly those who are in opposition. Regarding, one of our demands, which was pushed by the rank and file, was defunding UCPD. So the UC has a massive police force on our campuses. And that was a demand that actually put forward by us. Santa Cruz, Santa Barbara, and they both have a Cops of Campus group that came out of the BLM uprising. But the demand was very soon dropped by our bargaining team members. Like, they don't take it seriously. Last thing is, and this just sort of came to me, I think, Aaron, when you were talking, while this is not directly related to what you said, just from the experience of this strike, what I can say is desperately needed, and this can be provided by organizations such as Tempest or a place like Labor Notes, is that one of our biggest struggles is constantly writing and arguing against UAW talking points, right? So they keep making false claims. And the fact is that the vast majority of our members, even though they are grad students, they have very, very little understanding of how bargaining works, of union politics, of labor history, right? So basically, anything that UAW tells them, they take for granted as true. And what is like extremely helpful is to have consultants who, for example, when UAW makes a false claim about, let's say, impasse, can immediately provide us with counter talking points from the history of labor movements, from their own experiences organizing, because even many of the bargaining team members who are on the bargaining team and are on our side don't know a lot of things, and that's how the staff take control. They use this knowledge imbalance, and so just having that is extremely helpful to a strike like ours. As to like long-term sort of networking, is at least for grad students, I would say everything is very temporary, right? Because most of them are going to graduate, and a lot of them, they become active in the hype of the strike, and then they completely like set everything aside. And it's a very typical experience. And there are like very few who are like really radicalized by the experience and who may sort of look beyond to more radical spaces. But most people, they are activated and then they're deactivated.
Okay. Okay, so for the CUNY thing, I'll break it into three parts. The first, whether we're in a better place to win a higher amount of money for adjuncts. It is true, we lost almost 3,000 adjuncts during the beginning of COVID. We are down in numbers. Supposedly some of them have been hired back, but I'm not sure where the total number has been, but we are down. But the end of your point was because we're relatively speaking better off than we were in comparison to the other thing. I'm not sure we're going to hear from all these folks like these contracts are going to mean we actually aren't relatively speaking better off than we were. And I just recently ran the numbers on every single title. Well, I think I did about 30 titles within the PSC. Every single one of them, when you I looked at them with inflation adjusted numbers, is lower than 10 years ago, than 20 years ago. And that includes with that historic win for adjuncts in the last contract. The only title that was even marginally better was one that didn't even exist 20 years ago because they just made it up in one of the recent contracts. Okay. So we are every title, adjuncts, full-time faculty, Amahio, which is a staff title. Every single one of us is down and down a lot in terms of what our pay is actually worth in real dollars. So we better fight for something. I will say, I think we will probably want to push for the Committee for Adjuncts and Part-Timers, which is a committee within the union. They advanced an equity plan that would call for $13,000 a year for adjuncts. That's huge. That's more than double, but it's based on an MLA number. A couple of years ago, they released a number that said $11,500 a year but you should adjust it for where you live. So we adjusted it for New York City, and we adjusted it because it's been a couple of years since then. I say I'm not on that committee, but I know that we're going to support that demand. So frankly, if we go for 13,000, okay, well, maybe we're not going to win 13,000, but it sure as hell better not be 7,000 this time, right? I mean, because it should have been 7,000 last time. The second one was on whether or not the leadership now is more pro-strike than before. Rhetorically, do I think that the current leadership may say that? Sure. But do they try and shut down most discussions of strikes at meetings? Are they actually pursuing many of the things in that resolution, which was passed by the delegates about strike readiness? So yeah, I don't know. Maybe they're not as bad as Bowen was about literally shutting down but one of our colleagues at a march in December had a strike sign and was bodily moved from behind the podium by one of the officers in the PSC so that it was not going to be in all the pictures with the politicians. So, you know, they may say that, but I'm waiting for something more than just a little rhetoric from some of them. Finally, Michael, to your question about open bargaining, which would take many minutes to respond to. But I think one of the things that is key here to me, and especially in thinking about some of the McAlevey open bargaining things that I've gone to recently, open bargaining has to be bi-directional. It's not you just show up, and especially what the PSC has historically had is have us show up once in a while. And when I showed up to one of the HEO sessions, I was told I wasn't allowed to tell any of my colleagues what I saw in bargaining that day, what I heard from either side. Now they've told us that's going to be different this year, and they've told us they're going to invite us to more sessions. Now that might make bargaining more transparent, but that's not open bargaining. If you don't have the ability to actually continually influence as a rank and file member the process of bargaining, that's not true open bargaining. I mean, McAlevey talks about there's big bargaining, there's transparent bargaining, there's open bargaining. They're overlapping, but they're not all the same. If you can't participate in caucusing, if you are not able to actually see the proposals of what is going on here so that members can comment and say, no, this is acceptable, this is not acceptable, so that members are talking with each other and the bargaining team. Hell, we don't even have a bargaining team elected by membership, which is essentially the bare minimum of even regular bargaining that McAlevey is arguing about. I have some problems with some of McAlevy's stuff, but I think this is useful for the conversation here. The EC just picked themselves as the bargaining team. So, you know, I do think that we will be probably in a much, from what it sounds like, it's great. It sounds like it will be more transparent than it has been in the past. It sounds like there will be more opportunities for people to be in the room than in the past. But I think it's missing, for me, some of the elements that are really important in open bargaining. And that multi-directional piece of it, that is one of, if not the most important part of open bargaining. It's not just showing, I get to show up and watch a show. You know, some sort of union political theater go on. That's not what open.
On bargaining.
That's so well put. I love that. Thank you. Can you all hear me through this microphone? It feels very far away. You know, I guess just to close, what I would say is that I'm really proud of our unit and what we accomplished together. But I just want to stress that it was really challenging. It was not easy. There was a lot of disagreement within our unit. There was a lot of disagreement around a lot of the things that people are talking about tonight: transparency, democracy, making sure that our rank and file had access to the proposals that were being submitted. That was something that was not automatic, believe it or not. Making sure that rank and file had a voice in the process, that knew what was going on. They were being informed properly. They were being communicated with properly. These are all things that we disagreed about a lot, and we still are going to be struggling with, I think, for the next 6 years. And I think, you know, transparency, democracy, is incredibly important, and we have a lot to learn, I think, frankly, in our unit. We have a lot to learn from everyone else here tonight, from especially, I think, from New School. I'm just like following what's going on at New School really closely, just absolutely awed by the solidarity on the picket line there, and what you're saying about students before. I was on the picket line, and I saw just their energy. It's just absolutely incredible. And I think at NYU, we have a lot to learn from that as well, as how to engage students, how to keep people engaged, how to keep people, you know, not only enforcing the contract, but keep people involved and making sure that they know that they're the union, and how do we transform it into the union that we want it to be, making sure that people are not becoming complacent and becoming apathetic about it and just, oh, other people will take care of that for us. There's a lot of that, I think, that we experience. So just closing, I'm very, very proud of us. We worked incredibly hard. We faced a lot of challenges, but there's a lot of room for improvement, and I'm hoping that we can all learn from all the other organizing that's happening in the city, and really continue to work together.
Yeah, I'm just gonna loosely pick up on some questions that were asked, but one of the things we were asked about what kind of like anti-racist, anti-abolitionist and abolitionist struggles we've been like incorporated within our union. I mean, that kind of like touches on a point that Sam was making, but to be a bit more grim in some sense, I do agree with Sam's assessment that there are actually, I think, very few people who get like really, really radicalized throughout a strike, in the sense that they're actually thinking of this as not just something that they want to be engaged with, so long as the strike continues. And then once you have a contract, you kind of go back to your ordinary life, you know? I think that's, to be honest, probably the attitude of like 99% of people. And even of the community organizers who are like still involved, to be totally frank, I'm not sure if like I would necessarily call these people who are trying to think of the union as not like a separate kind of like political space, which has its like separate sets of issues, etc. I think of a very, very few are trying to think it is in continuity with like their like socialist convictions or anything like that. And in that sense, I do think that maybe partly responsible for that is because a lot of this, it's something I touched on, but I do think that like the absence of like a shop floor in academic environments where you kind of like get constantly reminded that you're being exploited by Columbia, by universities, that is something that's responsible for that. And I think like a lot of these people who are like community organizers do not come from the conviction of like anti-capitalism, but more as like a general like vaguely like pro-union sentiment. So I think like one of the outstanding tasks that you need to do is to basically do a lot of like political education and consciousness for labor struggles to like meaningfully incorporate these struggles, instead of just like stopping at things like circulating petitions, etc. That's how I feel about it.
I'm still afraid of the microphone. I agree with so much as what's already been shared. I feel like I really admire what you shared, because I feel like I was trying to think of like language. My brain is like falling to pieces. But I think that the education part is really key. I think that that's the key for continuing coalition and collaboration, community of lifting everyone in tandem. Maybe we can't all get what we want at a singular point in time, but if we keep pushing, keep pressing, staying awake, staying activated, even after all of the buzz and highs of social media following our strikes or our contract wins, or you know, a really good op-ed, when that all falls silent, that we're still doing that work together. But then I also think too, like thinking about these larger issues of how can the space of the community that a union fosters be a place of kind of, you know, calling out injustice, calling out racism, sexism, homophobia, all of the things that we need to call out constantly, right? Even within these spaces of higher ed. And I feel like education is a key part. And I think that that also keeps people kind of hooked into the community and in conversation and dialogue. And I feel like that also becomes a new model for what we can think of the university as possibly being, right? A university without borders, or a university without the sort of perimeters of a campus or a particular area or region. So I think there's one thing that happened at the New School, and it's not necessarily anything that we created. Teach-ins have happened forever. But I think that our organizers were like, let's do Strike School with the Student Faculty Solidarity Group. And they kind of were the ones who kind of were at the helm of it. And they did an amazing job of organizing the first one. And looking around at the space, if you've ever been to Eugene Lang's campus, we have this courtyard. And of course, thinking about too, the significance of being in that courtyard with over 300 students, faculty, staff all around you in a space that, you know, we just got used to walking through passively, right? So think about the physical possibility of these spaces, of our campuses. And then we've had multiple Strike Schools since. At first, it was something to kind of raise awareness, to answer questions, to give that education about unions and labor movements. But I think that it's something that needs to continue. And I think that, like, what if we all just had Strike School once a month? We collaboratively, like, we're able to share and speak together, have our students alongside us, our peers, our colleagues from other communities, other labor movements, other industries. I feel like that's kind of an answer somehow, where we can start to talk about not only what has already happened to make space for us to enter in, but what space can we open up for others in the future.
Okay, just want to thank again this amazing panel. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And just a couple of announcements. We're going to have the Tempest Collective is organizing an online panel this Sunday about the uprising in Iran. So you can find that all about that in our social media. We're organizing for next month a panel on public sector organizing. So that's something else that you're going to be able to find. It's going to be in person. And we meet every month as well here in New York. So you can find all about that in our social media. And one last thing, if anybody wants to collaborate with the paying of this, you can reach out to me now and we'll see. Thank you so much for this. Thank you everybody for